also want to say my late father was mayor of my hometown for 3 terms, then he lost, and then he won again. So I wish him for that. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, good night. That's it. Peter Orner's work is genuinely original. We use that adjective a lot, and it doesn't apply most of the time. But it really applies to your work, Peter. You know, I'd like to focus a lot in our talk on the latest book, which is just enchanting. I've never read one like it, and I don't think you will either. Maybe the closest is Terence Hayes's, right? So, but man, it is. We'll get to it. I read all the short stories. They're all soul nourishing, and I've never read a story like any of the stories. There's a wonderful line, I think fairly early in your new book, Peter, where I think you're writing about the Hayes book, and you're praising it, and you say the only honest way to actually construct an actual life on the page is with a gathering of fragments. And I want to start with that because that seems to be emblematic of your artistic approach, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. So hold forth, sir.
Oh, self-justification. You know, if I could do it any other way, I wouldn't praise fragments in the sky like I tend to do. So I look for people who are Kingsman. Terence Hayes has this wonderful book about Etheridge Knight, a poet who was in Vietnam, and he was in time, and he was had a lot of problems with drugs, and he was also one of our greatest poets. And Hayes is tipping his hat to Knight in a way that he acknowledges isn't enough, you know, or isn't like full enough, and he sort of comes out with that. And I love that idea that he was just attempting to give some sense of why Hayes was so important to him without doing it all. And so I thought, okay, I like that. That's what he's a kid.
It also seems to apply to your creation of short fiction. It seems to be, right? Talk about that.
You know, somebody always been like lodged in a moment. I mean, I've always sort of gone for that. So stories that I dearly love often are those that, you know, kind of double down on a particular moment that, you know, does something radical to somebody or some two buddies.
Or two bodies. Two bodies. There are a lot of two bodies. There are a lot of broken couples in your work. We'll get to that. You've got this wonderful line about your approach to short fiction, and you wrote in one of your interviews fairly recently that you're interested less in the what happened and more the memories they lug around your characters. They lug around the loves, the regrets. I was on a panel not long ago with some novelists, and it was a very successful novelist, gave some writing advice to someone in the audience, and he said, I won't say it, he said F, he didn't say F. F flashbacks, F memories, just start them in action. Get your character out the front door, I don't care if she's gonna go buy some friggin' milk, get it going, don't have to remember or think about a damn thing. And on one level,
Like my book aggressive.
I know, I want to throw one too. Well, I'm like, I guess that's good advice. I was sitting on the panel thinking, Jesus, man, every second that I've been alive is sitting right here with me on this panel. How can I go milk without? Right. So, speak to that, sir.
It's not that I don't disagree with that. You know what I mean? I just
with the action advice.
Yeah, I mean, we carry it with us. So the idea that backstory is actually backstory is the problem. You know, it's all there in the movement, and I think you carry it with you. And yeah, some people like us maybe get a little lugged. We lug it to, you know, it's trailing behind us, but it's not as if, you know, in your work there isn't like a great deal of momentum. I think you have to have that. But I also think you can't, like you said, every minute is, and also think of all your minds. You know, we're strained. How many other places are we in? You know, and I like that idea of my characters sort of being elsewhere, even though they're here. I mean, I had a friend, she's a yoga teacher, and she said, you know, don't live in the present. That's exactly. No, exactly.
What'd you just say?
Right.
I was thinking about fourth grade.
Right. So, and I think that's true for us all. And certainly my characters, and they are passed on. We pull it with us, and it dictates what our characters do.
You said recently, and I love this. You said your biggest currency as a writer is memory, and you find it to be infinite well. Your memory, your character's memories, both.
Characters' memories primarily. I mean, I don't know how you feel, but I love writing nonfiction, and I feel like it's very much of a piece, But
With fiction.
yeah. I mean, I apply the same principles. I try to, movement and memory, also in fiction. But yeah, I think I agree, but I also shy away from sort of statements like I just said. You know what I mean? Like absolutes, right? My currency.
That's what I love about your work. There are no contradictions anywhere. No, there's nothing but contradictions. You also said in an interview not long ago that what the frig is an unreliable narrator or a reliable narrator? Aren't we all totally unreliable at all times? Aren't we?
And literally, we're all self-constructing. We're putting on a show, not just for each other, but for ourselves, right? And I just think that's a reality. I don't think it's a bad or good thing. I just think it's the truth. And the idea that there can be some objective, we get into stuff when it comes to objective, right? But I think, I do think that the objective is, especially writing, is really something I'm not sure I quite.
Can you give us a concrete example, sir?
Now I'm screwed. Now I'm totally screwed. But, I think it goes back to memory, right? I mean, it goes back to, I was rereading one of my favorite novels, Gilead, right now. There's a moment when Reverend Ames says something to the effect that a memory, that certain visions, certain things that happen to us are in retrospect. They didn't actually happen in real time. They actually are created. The vision is created after the fact. And I suppose that could be an example in the sense that it wasn't that particular moment until you created it later in your memory. It wasn't that something didn't happen, something must have. But I think I'm often with a character sort of, I guess trying to reckon that stuff, and I think it just, you reckon with stuff differently, depending on the hour that you remember.
Yeah, depending on the moment. There's a wonderful line, if you haven't read, everybody, This Boy's Life by Tobias Wolff. It's one of the great memoirs. It reads like a beautiful novel, and of course, you're in for a treat. We had to read his short fiction. But in there, he has this wonderful line I want your take on. Memory has its own story to tell. It seems to me that is, both your essays and your short stories totally embrace that thought. It's entirely subjective, and it's ever evolving. And maybe I'm wrong. Like you're right, one of the pieces in your wonderful new book, Still No Word From You, I'd love you to tell everybody where the title came from in a minute, but you're remembering the day Nixon flew off in his helicopter, resigning, and you said, well, I don't know, it could have been August, it could have been summer, it could have been spring. Let's say it's spring, and you talk about the fatigue of being able to look shit up so fast. I'm gonna stick to spring. But you're remembering how your mother's hands went still in the sink while she was washing dishes. And that's good.
Yeah, and I was, 4 years old, when the helicopter rose off the White House lawn. I do remember it was in Highland Park, Illinois, and I was on the counter, and we had one black and white. Obviously, they sewn. My dad liked sewing, but it had ears, and my mom was watching it, but not really watching it. And that's what I remember. At least, I mean, it's a short story in a memory, and I could ask my mother about it. I know she's read it. She hasn't commented, which is weird. No, my family doesn't really look, but
so still no word from her either. Peter, would you mind reading that one? That's short. I think it's the first one, isn't it? All right, This is what opens, and am I right, is it 107 short pieces?
Yeah.
Cool.
Exactly. Yeah. It starts with a quote from the great Ed O'Brien. O'Brien says, "A house remembers." On black and white TV in the kitchen, my mother and I watched Richard Nixon's helicopter slowly rise. My mother stood at the sink doing dishes. At one point, she stopped scrubbing and left her hands in the dishwasher. The kitchen of the house on Hazel Avenue. The house no longer exists. It's less about her expression than the hands. Her hands remained in the water. We were no longer scrubbing the dishes. Something to do with the stillness. Her hands suddenly motionless in the soapy water. Maybe at that moment, she wasn't thinking about Nixon at all. Which direction was she looking? Not at the TV. She was staring out at the backyard. The house on Hazel had a back patio with a low brick wall around it. I used to jump off the wall into the grass. The grass in the backyard of the house on Hazel was a deep, luscious green. If you yanked up a strand and pulled it, it made a squeaky sound. I'd eat that grass by the mouthful. I don't know which month in 1974 Nixon called it quits. I could check. It's exhausting being able to check everything and anything. Let's say it was spring, late spring, when Nixon resigned. And let it be wrong if it's wrong. And the grass in the backyard was a deep May green, especially where the shadow of the tall sycamore tree stretched across the lawn. My mother was looking out the window. She would not leave Hazel Avenue with my brother and me in tow for almost another decade, but I know I read something in her eyes, as if she already had taken on. My mother, the sound of her splashing, scrubbing, and then stillness.
There's that line, let it be wrong. Who cares? It's not what I'm getting after
I mean,
here.
it's sort of inoculation. You know what I mean? And of course, at some point I had to look it up. It was August, right?
Yes.
You probably know, right? And that book.
So some of us weren't 5 years old when that happened.
But I like the idea of owning your memories. And I think that Google has taken that away from us.
Yeah.
To a certain extent.
Hear, hear. You've written and said a few times that writing about others is quite a challenge because people are impenetrable, even to ourselves. Speak, sir.
I mean, this is what I tell my students. It's all about character. I just want character depth. People are so infinitely interesting. And so when I get a flat character in a story, I'm like, why? Why am I here? Why did I enter this world? That's what interests me, is that the infinite, the contradictions, the things, the self-sabotage, the vulnerabilities, all of that is so fascinating. And the lies we tell ourselves, all of those things, I just can't get enough. And, nonfiction, I think I pointed a little bit inward, but I tried. I have this principle that I think I got some, not to name drop Václav Havel, but Havel said in writing his plays, he said, I may treat people I love sometimes roughly, but and I think you know this better than anybody, I treat myself even harsher. And I always make sure to look at myself more deeply, more intensely. That's what Havel said. I've never forgotten it.
I read a line from some memoirist years ago. He said, if you're going to write a memoir, you should be able to sue yourself for libel. Have you stumbled across Tim O'Brien, the great Tim O'Brien's The Things That Carried Tim O'Brien's essay, The Magic Show?
I haven't.
Okay, in it, I'll make it very towards the end, he says one of the smartest things I've ever heard any writer say about characterization.
O'Brien.
He said, successful characterization on the page is not a pinning down process where you nail a character. It's quite the opposite. The deeper you go, the more unknowable we get. And of course, his thought is, we are all ultimately a mystery. Just think of the people you've been living with for 45 years. Who the hell is that guy? Right? I mean, what do we know?
Imagine my kids are here, and some of them in the audience, so I'm imagining them looking at me right now, thinking like, who's this guy?
Oh, it's okay. He knows you, kids. He knows you. All right. So one of the many wonderful things. Actually, can you tell everybody where the title came from?
Sure. My grandfather was in World War II. He was a naval captain. He was was old for the war, and he like literally begged to go to the South Pacific. And at first they put him as in the Coast Guard. He was going up and down the Calumet River in Chicago looking for Nazis. That was the story.
Just in case, right?
And the story goes, according to him, he was so good at that that when they needed people, and he was a very good navigator, that they put him in charge of, at some point, he was second in command of an LST landing ship tank, and then he became a captain. And my grandparents had maybe a strange relationship, well, no stranger than anybody else's, I suppose. And my grandfather wrote letters to my grandmother every single day that I can discern when he was gone, which was about 2.5 years. And when I tell this story, people often come up to me and say, actually, my grandfather did that too. So it's not that unusual. Maybe in this case, though, my grandmother didn't respond. And so it piles up one after one, he's begging her to write back. And at one point he says, it's been such and such time, and still no word from you. And that's what it just broke my heart. And so she was busy. She was a professional dancer, and she was raising 2 kids in Chicago. And he went out to I think she was a little bit resentful. He couldn't get enough of that war. He didn't necessarily need to go. He wanted to go and save the world, but he wasn't thinking much about his family. So it's not entirely her.
Want a word from me? Come home. Okay. I have never read a book like this, and I'll say it 100,000 times. It is such a beautiful homage, celebration, prayer. It's a prayer to the reading, writing life, and not just the reading, writing life, but it's the lived life in the reading life, I think. So we just got that lovely moment from 5-year-old Peter Orner in a memory about his mother's still hands in the dishwasher on the day Nixon flies away from the presidency. But then you'll have this wonderful Celine at a brothel, in America, writing in the kitchen. And then you'll go to a moment with your brother and a sad moment with your dad and the breakup of your family, and you'll talk about Gene Reese and Ford Maddox Ford. What in the hell are you up to here, sir?
Well, I wanted to integrate what I was doing all day with the stories about my family, because it felt right. So it felt like jumping from memoir or a story about my family to a story I was reading and thinking about. It just started to feel natural. And so, I'm sure you experienced this. I was supposed to be doing something else. I was on a deadline for something else, and I every morning I would warm up to not do what I was supposed to be doing, and I would do this, and it just started to pile and pile. It sort of started before the pandemic, but the pandemic definitely helped me realize that maybe I was onto something, but it was a default of something I was running from.
Well, maybe. But you've also talked about recently, and I agree with you, that, earlier in your writing life, and you can tell us when and what, but you could not go a day without writing. You had to get your writing in. But now you got to get your reading in, even more so. And of course, and I just finished my last class this semester this afternoon, and last piece of advice I left to these aspiring young writers is just read, please read. Saul Bellow said famously that a writer is a reader moved to emulation. And speak to that if you would, kind sir.
You didn't have another quote of Saul Bellow.
Yeah. You got another one? Go ahead.
No, I was going to say the bad one.
Oh, he's got a bad one.
Yeah. But I totally, absolutely. Sadly, it was like in the first chapter, the first paragraph is obituaries.
Anti-Semitic stuff.
Yeah, it was show me the proofs to
The Zulus.
Exactly.
Yeah, the Zulus.
Exactly. As if you read a lot of Zulu literature.
Yeah.
And I say that with great affection. I love, I wouldn't do what I do without Bellow. And Bellow's right. In this case, is that every morning I work in order to work, but lately, last few years, I read not to work. It's like it was mercenary before. Now it's like it's food. It's everything, and I don't feel like it has to lead to me emulating. You know what I mean? And maybe that's just, I don't know. Maybe that's where I'm at. Maybe I wish I had that for some reason. You know what I'm saying? Like I wish I was driven more to, I think I'm sort of, now I'm kind of more addicted to reading than writing. And for a writer, that's not a great necessarily.
But it's your 7th book, something's working. You said at one point that reading is writing without the pain and loneliness. Can you read us another something?
Sure. Howie Baumgarten was one of those people who returns to his hometown because it's the last place on earth that will have him. Having failed every other place, what else is there? Not that anybody in our town would have cared much if Howie Baumgarten dropped dead in the street wearing one of his homemade tie-dye shirts. He opened up a store on Central Avenue and 2nd Street where Chandler's Stationery used to be. Howie's place was filled with cheap, random stuff nobody wanted. We'd go there after school and not buy anything. Also, Howie had a monkey. I forget the monkey's name. With that gaunt little monkey on his shoulder, Howie spoke in sudden, spastic bursts. His voice was so high, it was like he'd sucked up the helium he used to blow up all his balloons. The man could monologue and breathe through his nose at the same time, and you don't realize what a feat this is until you try it. When Howie talked, his monkey listened, his little head in profile. And then, without warning, as abruptly as he'd begun, Howie would clamp up, go completely silent, and squint at us from behind his oversized glasses. Then he'd watch us as we wandered around the store picking stuff up, putting stuff down. Shoplifter, Howie said. Any one of us rosy cheap nothings could be a shoplifter. And the monkey would watch us too, like a hawk. Gag gifts, dusty art supplies. He sold knockoff slinkies, magic 8 balls. He sold goldfish that he scooped out of a dirty fishbowl with a spoon and dropped in Ziploc baggies. Off-brand candy, grow-it-yourself crystal. Any useless Hazarai a wholesaler was willing to unload cheap, Howie would buy in the eternal hope that some person someday in some not-so-distant future might drop $2 or $3 on it. I'm not looking to get rich, he'd say. I'm only looking to, and he'd squeeze a plastic dog shit that squeaked. Get it? I'm looking to squeak by. Get it? That's for my kids, Roscoe and Phoebe. Most of the time, his speeches were about how he'd been ripped off by one supplier or another. These people are rapacious. You got no idea what a small businessman in America endures. Not a single clue. Tell your fathers, those paper titans, those captains of non-industry, those bilkers off the tit of the common man, what it's like out here in the harsh light of... My dad sells lumber, Mickey Ross would say. Proletariat of the world unite. We'll hang all the fathers, each and every one of them by their toes like Mussolini, and we'll start with the lumber barons. History is circular. Don't forget it. What goes around comes around. You think if you shit on people, you won't get shat on yourself, that if you chop down all the trees... My dad works at Menards, Howie. He doesn't own it. Then, without transition, Howie would bolt right into a few rousing thoughts about how even so things were getting better every day. A little hunkier doorier, then they'd be surprised how many little old biddies came in for the cost of jewelry. They spend all their money, they squirrel away on their earrings. They pay in quarters and nickels. They shake out their coffee cans on this very counter, the savings of a lifetime. Isn't everybody entitled to a little beauty? I'm in the dream business. I hold up a mirror so they can look at their sparkling ears. He didn't seem to have any family left in town, or maybe they disowned him long ago. We didn't know where he lived. He may have slept in the back of the store. Whatever the case, he didn't have much, just the rented storefront and the things he worked so hard to collect. There was always new inventory. Check out these magnets. They work on skin. It's a miracle. I'm serious. Give me your arm. Give me your arm. Howie may have been an ordinary loser, but inside his store behind his counter, he was king freak. That wild bramble of curly hair, his pea-like eyes behind those giant glasses, the tie-dye shirts that didn't fit over his stomach, the monkey. Senior year, Mickey Ross drew a cartoon of Howie for the school paper. In it, Howie, monkey on his shoulder, holding a festoon of balloons, floats away into space. I've been trying to remember what the caption said, because apparently it was the caption, even more than the drawing, that set Howie off. He ranted about it for weeks. He said he'd been humiliated before the eyes of the world as if Shoreline was the Wall Street Journal. Not merely insulted, but legally injured. It's called intentional infliction of emotional distress. It's a tort. Any of you fuckwads know what a tort is? An act or omission that gives rise directly or indirectly to an injury or harm, actionable and civil. He wrote letters to the editor. He wrote letters threatening Mickey's parents, the school district, the superintendent, the city of Highland Park, the state of Illinois, the NFL, and the League of Women Voters. He banned Mickey Ross from the store, for life, he said, effective immediately. He put a poster in the window, his own cartoon of Mickey with exaggerated buck teeth, and under it, banished, perpetuity. I call Mickey in Chicago. We still talk. He's one of the few people who answers the phone anymore. He couldn't remember the caption either. Some forgettable joke, Mickey said. He's at his own knocks. Mickey has a rough divorce, in and out of work, trouble with one of his sons. He never says what kind of trouble. You think I don't still feel bad about it? Last thing Howie needed was some smartass drawing a picture of him. You writing about Howie? What makes you say that? Why else would you ask? Spare him the pity, the false amends. Jesus, am I wrong? I'm just trying to tell it straight, not make a character out of him. Right, Mickey says, because he already was a character. You don't have to do any work. Do you remember the monkey's name? I asked. He must be dead by now. The monkey? Howie. How are you doing, I said. I mean, really. You're asking? I called you. You called me about Howie. Mick, tell me, how is it with you? A few months after the cartoon, it was summer. College followed by whatever we've done with our lives since. Eventually, Howie closed the store and reopened a few months later in Evanston near Northwestern. He must have figured he had better luck with college kids. That store didn't last long either. I tried to resist this temptation. Vanished people should stay vanished no matter how findable they've now become. He was just some funny dude we knew in high school. In the afternoons, we'd hang out at his store. In a post dated February 12th, 2020, Howie Baumgarten writes that he's in a spot and could use some help. Any help. I'm not particular. Cash, checks, PayPal, no longer accepting Diners Club. There was a single comment. It was from a kid I remember from high school, a year below us. I always liked you, monkey man. Stay strong. Nobody can hide anymore. Nobody even wants to hide anymore. I call Mickey back. Howie's not dead. Woo!
There's such humanity in that piece, Peter, and throughout this beautiful book. You know, in this interview, I don't know if it was long ago or recently, you said something that I really admire. And I'd love for you to expound on it a bit if you can or want to. And it's that you write for the dead and the forgotten. Like Howie, who's not dead, but maybe forgotten, but not by you. I'm curious if you've been conscious of that for a long time as a writer, or is that a new insight?
I think it's something I've been carrying around for a while. I think it's from reading the people that I started reading. Back when I started doing this. Your father, Ed O'Brien, people who mind, the stories of the dead and Bible, people, and throughout this book I talk about them. Gino Burial is what I found later on in my life, but it's essential to me. So I think it was being drawn to what I was drawn to kind of, I did want to emulate that, to get back to the Bible quote. I wanted to emulate the stories of
There's a celebration of geography, place, landscape, culture in your work. I haven't had the pleasure of reading your two novels, but I'm going to. Do you want to talk about the novel form versus short stories versus essays? Because your short stories are so short. How the hell did you do a novel? I mean, I see a sprinter. Where'd you get the marathon out of you, kid?
You mentioned Tobias Wolff a moment ago. Tobias Wolff once said something to the effect of, he said, It turned out it was me. You know, and so, and I have always sort of thought about that. I also think, like, you know, there was William Carlos Williams, brief lines, brief intensity. You know, like I've always admired, especially how poets do so much damage with so little words. And I feel like prose writers in the show should be thinking about that. And you know, the question of novels, I struggle. My editor, Little Brown, Ben George, is very generous to me. My novels are sort of similar in the sense of, you know, they're fragmentary, they're mosaics. And I feel like I put together a world through fragments and less from a narrative that doesn't, you know, I stop and start a lot, you know. Something I think about in one of Dad's essays, where he says something to the effect of, you know, life is a stopping and a starting, you know, and that short stories in particular kind of captured that. And I've always admired that thought, but I also don't think it necessarily applies to stories. You know, it applies to everything I do. I'm just always kind of trying to figure out how to start again. You know, I learned from the structure from your novels. You once said, I remember this is Joseph Beth Bookstore in Cincinnati. You said, I was trying to move ahead, and I said, part 2. You know?
Super coffee, part 2.
Okay. You know, so that's how I write novels. With that advice.
You mind speaking a little? I'm sure everyone knows my father's work. If not, my father, Andre Dubus, was a short story master, considered one of the finest in the English language, certainly as an American. He died 24 years ago. But what I want to share with you all, and you can share as much as you feel like, Peter, but he was your artistic mentor, right? And that's how we met. I met you. You were the Thursday night. You want to talk about that part of your life and his life a little bit?
Sure. Of course. You know, I just got incredibly lucky. Andre Dubus had a workshop at his house. It was coffee famous. People probably know it. I was taking a class at Emerson. I was a continuing student at Emerson. And a guy in that class was moving to Seattle. And he said to me, hey, you want to see an Andre Dubus workshop? And I was like, kind of fell over on my chair. And of course. I called Andre, left a message on the answering machine, and he called back and said, all right, you can be in the workshop Thursday night, but you gotta be over 25 and not in grad school. I was both of those things. I was under 25, and I was in law school. And I said, lie. I called him back, I said, what's the YMCA, which I did part-time, so it wasn't told lie, and that I was 27. And he said, fine, you tell me. Anyway, I was every Thursday night for 4 years. We would drive up to Boston. Jeff Strike, friend Rachel, drive up and it was an incredible thing. And, you know, I could talk forever about it, but it was, one thing I'll say this is it was a way in which, as a mentor, that Andre listened. You know, he just listened. He didn't say much in that group, actually. You know, I know we all got, you know, I don't know. I just had a flash of fatherness, you know. But it was that listening. It was almost like a sound you make when sometimes I feel like the line worked, and it's like, okay, I sort of like, all right, I'm on to something here, and you know, it was a long time. And incredibly, astoundingly lucky, grateful.
I think he was the first honoree of this festival, is my late dad. I don't know if you know that. Yeah. Let's talk about law school. What in the hell were you thinking? What was that about, Peter? Nothing against you lawyers, we all need them.
You know, a complicated relationship with that question. I come from a long line of the 3 generation of Chicago lawyers. My great-grandfather studied law. He wasn't actually officially a lawyer. My grandfather's a lawyer. My father's a lawyer. My dad tried to talk me out of it. He knew that I would be a crap-ass lawyer. He knew it. So I rebelled against him and went to law school. So there you go. Because I wanted to screw him. I was like, you know, my dad was a plaintiff's attorney, defended those clients, Allstate sent me to college, stuff like that. And, not great, not stuff he worked very hard, he was good at it, but I'm not proud of that legacy. So my plan was to be a public defender in school, and not join this firm and all that. And I didn't, but I didn't even do that because I would have been a terrible public defender. I did try one case in my whole life, which I lost. But I knew a lot about stories. I actually kind of loved it. I'm still paying for it, but I still loved it. I did love it. It's about people fighting. It's great. Law textbook, you looking for a story idea?
Yeah, wherever you can get it.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk about something it's a hot button these days, and that is writing from the point of view of others. Writing from the point of view of others. You said in a recent interview that, okay, I'm a Chicago boy, a Jewish boy from Chicago. Why does that make it easier for me to write about being a Jewish boy from Chicago? And of course, you're talking about writing from the point of view of an African woman. I'll let you take this one. It's a loaded one these days.
I stick by this idea that it's the height of arrogance to think that we know our own demographic. I just do. I think it takes a lot of chutzpah, to do this at all. To imagine someone you're not, even if you think you can kind of track their this because you're from that place. I think even there we should be wary. You know what I mean? If we just start there, then as we get further distant from ourselves, then maybe it ratchets up as well it should. But it's all hard. It's all hard. And so, writing across gender, it's hard. But God knows we know the greatest writers do it. Right. And so, the idea that we would be closed off from another human being, I do reject. Fundamentally reject.
Amen,
But I also think you gotta do it right. And if you don't, and how to doing it right is we know how to, what did Potter Stewart say about pornography? We know it when we see it. We know when someone isn't doing the work. We know it.
So it has to do with artistic intent.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You
If
talk
you do it
about-
right, no one's gonna attack you. I think. But I might be wrong.
Who agrees? Show of hands. I agree. Sarah Orne Jewett is the one who famously said, write what you know. But E.O. Doctorow said, okay, fine, but how do you know what you know?
Exactly.
Were you planning on reading from the Celine one at all?
Can.
I would love to hear some or all of Celine.
A little bit.
A little bit, especially Celine's, that sentence.
Okay.
Okay.
Celine, famous Nazi sympathizer, French. I gotta find it though. Shit.
But he's on 36, 37.
Okay, great. So
I did my homework.
Maybe I'll just read a little bit of the beginning and then the end. Sometime in his 20s, Celine made his way to America, broke and meandering. From New York, he took the train to Detroit and got himself hired at Ford. He heard Ford would take anybody, and this turned out to be true. They took him. He did some job on the line for hours. What it was, he wasn't sure. Something about calibrating linchpins. When he proved incompetent, they gave him a little cart with tools to push around the factory. After work, he found a brothel, because when you're Celine, you find a brothel. You want, Celine says, to get to the root of the transactional nature of man, in any city, any country, go to a brothel. By the end of the week, he's a regular. In Journey to the End of the Night, he writes, to survive, I needed lecherous tonics, drastic elixirs. In that house, I didn't have to pay much. They gave me friendly terms, because I brought the girls a few little refinements from France. Anyway, he falls in love with a prostitute named Molly, and she was going to take him away, and they're going to go and open up a store together. And Molly suggests gently that they could make a go of it. We can start a little business, sell something, candy, open a deli. We won't be unhappy, she says. We'll be like other people. As repulsive to him as being like other people's sounds, Celine's tempted to stick around for a while longer. Molly, oh sweet, sweet lady Molly. He rides the tram through the night. He leans his forehead against the window and looks out at this American city called Detroit, a name these clowns pronounce so incorrectly it hurts his ears. Still, it's what he sees. It's what Celine notices while riding that tram, that people who've been working all night cleaning stores and offices, freeloader, sure, but he was out there watching life. They're too tired to complain, he says of these people, because they've been reduced to meat. And as the sun begins to rise, Celine writes, on pavements sticky with the small rain of dawn, the daylight glistened blue. The Jew-hating shitbag he became deserves maybe a spoonful of posthumous forgiveness for giving us the line, the small rain of dawn. Don't we know the rain he's talking about? The sort of rain that's hardly falling, but soaks you to the bone anyway?
And I love that you didn't let him off the hook. So this wonderful short essay about Celine is between two short essays. One about Neil Sedaka and Peter's parents sitting in front of the fire, and the other is Peter and his brother walking to the shores of Lake Michigan, right? That's Chicago? Yeah. You remember, we call it flyover country around here, I don't know. One of them lakes in Chicago. I'm kidding. Go ahead.
No, I got nothing.
Talk about Fall River.
Fall River. Fall River. We talk about flyover country, right? What the Department of Public Works of Massachusetts did to Fall River was create flyover country because they put a highway, as you all know, 195 right through the heart of that city. My grandfather had a furniture store. My mother's father had a furniture store, Kaplan's Furniture, and it was on a street that no longer exists because the freeway decimated that part of Fall River. It's not new. There's nothing unique to Fall River, right? It happened all over the country, but I think part of what I do as a story writer, as a writer in general, comes from the fact that my grandfather's store was taken, and my grandfather mourned it. He loved that store. My mother still tells stories about how he would just love being out on the floor. It was his father's store. He inherited it, and his father was tyrannical and barely let him. And finally, his father died. My grandfather was like, "It's mine now." And then a few years later, Massachusetts took it, eminent domain, and so I grew up going to Fall River. I was a Chicago kid, but every summer we'd spend in Fall River, hot, sweaty, Lizzie Borden weather, and I just fell in love with the city. As my grandfather, he loved Fall River history. He loved everything about that city that had taken so much away from him, and I sort of, if I have any kind of spiritual soul, it's like I'm trying to channel my Massachusetts grandfather. He was the kindest man in that country. And he died at 59. And he ate him. I have his a diary, a spending diary that he had. And he wrote down every dollar he spent for just the last 7 years of his life. Because he was broke, but B, he liked to keep track of stuff. I could see how he died. They were out every single night. At Magoni's, he would write, Chinese restaurant. It said something else, but everything he wrote in there showed me how what he did was hard. My grandmother lived alone for 25 to 30 years.
So that's your mom's side of the family. Dad's side's all from Chicago. We only have a few minutes left, but I thought we could end on a story.
You all right?
Two things you said about stories that I find wonderfully compelling. One is that you fight really hard not to have an emotional endpoint in a story. I don't know if that's accurate when I read your stories, but I believe you said that.
Sure.
What do you mean?
Well, I think you can't change it up. I think you gotta. If it's there, it's there. You can't, and I think the end point has to do with what everything that came before, and you can't sort of grab that ending Like, God knows I try. You know what I mean? As a principle, I think, you know, you gotta just let, you know, it's Chekhov, right? And he wanted the story to carry on after the period. He wanted you to fall. And that's, you know, people talk about short stories, but they're not short. They have a long fall.
And they start before they start.
Absolutely.
Right. Which is why memory and time is so important. I think we both agree on this. You don't have much of religion, I don't either. But for you, stories are sacred.
My daughter's about to have a bar mitzvah. So
That's good.
We got religion in our family. So she speaks wonderful Hebrew. It's amazing. I didn't have a bar mitzvah, I didn't either, but my daughter's doing great. So, but yes, I mean, this is what I worship. I mean, I actually get in trouble. Phoebe busts me because I do go to temple and I have a poetry collection inside the Siddur. So, I just figure we're people of the book, you know, we can do that. So, but my daughter thinks that that's not exactly polite to the rabbi. So,
You're right, daughter of Peter.
she's crazy, she's not going to receive it.
So, let's end with this, man. So, the writing of stories are sacred. The reading of stories are sacred. Both equally. How are they different for you as a writer and a reader and a human being?
I think the reading, I mean, that's what I was trying to celebrate, was that it you know, creating is one thing, but this intimate conversation that you have with the, you know, think about your houses and the books in them and how you gravitate towards certain covers and titles. You know, that's different than than the creation, which is also wonderful and part of our lives, but it's like less mixed up with the other stuff, right? I mean, nobody knows that you preached for Catherine M. Porter last night and were in tears. You know what I mean? You know, they might know the story you wrote from it, and then they'll read it somewhere, and that's great. But I feel like it's the most private of things that happen in literature is what I have started to realize. Things that I've done. William Maxwell said when he wrote a beautiful essay, he was turning 80, in the New York Times Magazine. He said, you know, the thing I'm going to miss is the books. And he listened. Elizabeth Bowman, still the Bedford book I still have, right? And a couple of others, Chekhov, and some others. And he said, that's what he's going to miss. He didn't say I'm going to miss writing my beautiful stories. And we all know William Maxwell wrote some of the greatest we've ever had.
Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Orner.